So, as you just explained it, it seems like Israel has the same project from the beginning, from 48 on, and which of course would validate the notion that it's a continuous Nakba, gradual, slow, but that's the purpose. The purpose is to create the Eretz Israel, so the greater Israel, which would be solely the land of the Israeli Jews, and the Palestinians would disappear one way or another. That seemed to be project from the start. At the same time, there are ostensible shifts in Israeli policy and in Israeli, maybe even imaginary. For instance, what I'm thinking about is an article published by another common friend, Neve Gordon, an Israeli historian, that he published around 2010, if I'm correct, where he insisted on the fact that there were two operating principles at different times. That from 67 to the first Intifada, so from the Six-Day War when there's the occupation of the West Bank and the occupation of Gaza, until the first Intifada, the Israeli project was not so much to expel, but to depoliticize the local Palestinian population. And that in fact, if we're talking about condition of existence calculated, there the calculation was calculation towards a slight improvement of their living condition, of the Palestinian population under occupation, living condition, so that they would abandon their political hopes of an aspiration for free Palestine. And that kind of stops around the time of the Oslo, what will lead to the Oslo Accords, where the principle of colonization, but a colonization that would improve the life of the colonized so as to appease them, is replaced by what he calls the principle of separation, where ostensibly it's about creating a two-state solution, but in fact it's about pushing away the Palestinians so that Israelis wouldn't have to see a Palestinian again in their lives. And so that sort of is this slow process that will lead to the reawakening of the ethnic cleansing and the expulsion imaginary. So how do you balance these two? First of all, do you agree that there was like shifts both in policy and imaginary, and how do you balance them?
I think that in my earlier work, I had much more patience and attentiveness to the nuance in Israeli policy. But I tend to think now that, of course, there are contradictions. There are political contradictions. There are different players. There are different plans, there are different methods. I think that the meta constant of Israeli politics in Palestine is effectively the complete land of Israel and the complete ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. I think it has different temporalities. It has different aims. It has different means in which it is undertaken, and within that you have a kind of the idea of pacification, temporary pacification through improvement of condition of life. So, Sharon, at the same time that he tries, and here's the contradiction. No, Sharon is trying to expel Palestinians, just like what Israel is doing now.
When are we talking about?
We're talking about immediately after the occupation. The occupation is, Israel called it the 6 Days War. The Palestinians called that period the 4 years war, from 67 to 71, in which the Palestinian armed organization continue the war with the whatever weapons they could grab from the retreating Egyptian army after the Israeli occupation of Gaza Strip and the Sinai. Sharon is continuing this very same push from north to south. We haven't spoken about it, but effectively, the genocide, to our understanding, began on the 13th of October, when Israel is delivering an evacuation order for the safety of the Palestinians. So imagine, on the same day, on the 13th of October, is the day that the president of Israel said there are no uninvolved civilians in Gaza, where the minister, at the time now the Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, is saying, we would starve them out until they all move out of the world or leave. And at the same day, there's a lull in bombing, and what the Israeli legal defense in The Hague calls millions of A4 leaflets are falling onto Gaza and telling people, for your safety, you need to move south of Wadi Gaza. Remember, we spoke about Wadi Gaza before, that notion of the threshold of the desert, i.e. from the more water-rich part of the Gaza Strip down to the more desert part of the Gaza Strip at this particular moment. That action has been a kind of, has echoes and precedents throughout Israeli history in Gaza. Initially, the Israelis are trying to push the Palestinians during the 48. They're unable to do that. We spoke about that before. In 1952, they tried to convince the Egyptians and the UN to move Palestinians from Gaza to Egypt, and if not, at least from northern Gaza, into a number of villages that in the 50s they want the Egyptian government to build along the Via Maris in the north of the Sinai Desert, along a sweetwater canal from the Nile that they're planning to do. Later in the 50s, they raid the Palestinian refugee camps in order to force them to leave. In 1956, when they first occupied, they want them to leave. Every time it stopped politically, all through Palestinian perseverance and resistance. And then in 67, Sharon is using the counterinsurgency, again, to do the same thing, to attack the two big refugee camps in northern Gaza, namely Jabalia and Al-Shati, and to push them into the refugees, through the counterinsurgency, generate enough destruction in the camp so people would leave to Egypt. Also, that does not succeed, but something else happens. At the same time, Sharon is involved in promoting housing for refugees, and him and Dayan is the Minister of Defense, obviously, at this time, think that the problem of refugees is an urban problem of political identity, i.e. because the squalor in the refugee camps buttress a certain political ideology of refugees. What means being refugee is wanting to return to the area, and most Palestinians come from the area just around Gaza. If they would give them decent housing, they would just stop being political and would be content with it. I.e. pacification, which is another constant colonial technique by the French in Algeria and by the British in Uganda and in other places. No, you build housing in order to pacify, so that they will have something to lose. And at the same time, you kind of allow people to work or be integrated, be proletarianized as manual, unskilled labor in Israeli industry and agriculture. In fact, Palestinians were going to cultivate the very fields from which, at this point, their parents were expelled. Right? So that is one of the trajectories that is, mirrored today, or just before October 7th. That was clearly Netanyahu's policy. Bring Qatari money, allow the development of Gaza so that people would create leverage by letting them have something to lose in that respect. And this depoliticization through architecture did not work. And the But the more fundamental and constant, and even that depoliticization for that is just temporary, because the more fundamental move was always the reduction of conditions of life. Even when they were allowing the integration of Palestinian manual laborers into Israeli economy, they were still damning Wadi Gaza and damning, quote unquote, the Palestinian industry by not allowing credit. You cannot have industry without credit. The economy was shekel, it was lira economy at the time, now shekel, but like, so Israel has control over the financing of what is happening there, and there was no loan, there was no factories, they were not getting planning permission, they were not allowing to drill wells, there was no water coming in. As you know, Golda and Eshkol were saying quite clearly, so the people would be just like, would just like have enough and leave. And I think that is the more constant kind of meta direction, though, you know, the other one does exist and did exist. Rather than a period, it is something that kind of interlaces with it as part of the kind of contradictions of Israeli state economy. And now, again, no, I mean, the idea of the reconstruction that we are subjected to now, no, I mean, Trump wants to evict everybody into Egypt, and Saudis would build some kind of Dubai on the Mediterranean, and then, you know, who wants to start a war from Dubai, no, supposedly. I think this is naive and idiotic, because the Palestinian rights are, you know, equally held and insisted on by, you know, Palestinian refugees living in dire conditions, by Palestinian middle class, and by the Palestinian intellectuals in Europe and the US. There is no, you know, the rights is a right, it's a political right, and it's not being buttressed to economic necessity. It's never worked, that this approach.